Hello and welcome to another roundtable under the International Relations and Foreign Policy cluster at Nickel and Dime. Today we will be discussing climate change, and this is the roundtable for December. This meeting will be moderated by Dhimant. So, Dhimant.
Hello, dear viewers. I welcome you to this center. And on today's topic, we have an interesting topic on COP28 and its impact. So, the first question I would have with my learned guests here are: what is your opinion that climate change would have an effect on Indian energy security for India?
I think a couple of these, for starters, it will heavily lead to the disruption of the energy infrastructure that India has in place. It can lead to climate change, can lead to, weather events such as hurricanes, storms, floods, wildfires. And these events can, heavily damage or disrupt the energy infrastructure which is at place, including power plants, transmission lines, or, leading to interruptions in energy supply. Furthermore, because of shifting climate patterns, it can also lead to changes in energy demand. For example, precipitation patterns or rainfall patterns can heavily impact the availability of water resources for hydropower generation, which is something that Gujarat is right now focusing on. So these kind of change in weather patterns due to climate change can, I think, heavily have an impact on the energy security which is at place.
Yes, exactly. For example, we had the Fukushima nuclear plant, which went to a very critical state due to a tsunami. Uh, anybody else would like to say anything on this?
Yeah, I think it's important that we as a developing country don't have the required funds to try and go towards different forms of energy right now. So solar energy, when they're trying to use that en masse for the entire country, that to like a billion people is a little difficult. We are very heavily dependent on like older forms of energy. We use coal and oil a lot. So, when it comes to energy security, if we move towards a renewable sort of energy method, as long as we get the assistance that we need, I think it would actually reduce our dependence on oil and coal a lot, and that could have a lot of geopolitical ramifications for India as well. As long as we can sort of hold on like, ourselves indigenously, sort of have our energy created here instead of having to import it from everyone, it would actually positively impact energy security, in my opinion.
Yes, valid points here. So moving on, the nation we have, do you feel that there has been a change of policy in the developed world, in the global north regarding climate change and the carbon crisis?
I think for sure, especially when we take into example the USA, the USA and many other countries have actually adopted the Paris Agreement commitments and incorporated the policy suggested into their legislative frameworks. And they've also there's been something called, and the environment tax, which is something that developed countries have done, as a way to internalize the social cost of carbon emissions. This can basically take in the form of a, carbon tax or a cap and trade system, which can encourage businesses to reduce the carbon footprint, and something that also been adopted by countries in the European Union. Then all countries, especially the global north, have also been in a good place to substitute their fossil fuel dependence and basically have a culture of driving in cars who basically are just dependent on energy and electricity, for example. So they have reduced their fossil fuel dependence. Then there's also been investments in R&D by many countries because they have a lot of capital in their developed countries. They obviously have a lot of money to spare, and that money has often gone into research and development and basically studies which can help actually trace us and educate us on what we countries who are not the developed part of the developed world can do.
Yes, interesting points here, Tanish. Sorry, Nakul. Tanish, please.
I think it's important to also look at some of the countries in Europe, France, for example, that have heavily increased their dependence on renewable sources of energy. I think to a point where most of their energy is coming from these sources. So as Nakul said, they have a lot of capital. They have that social security, space to put more money towards this infrastructure and still be able to develop at the same time and have enough money for their citizens. So I think when it comes to the global north, they have been able to have change for themselves. But I think what they're lacking is assisting developing countries. So, like the $100 billion that were promised to move from the developed countries to the developing countries, that never happened. So, the policy of nations of the developed world, while is fair towards their own internal matters, where they are trying to use renewable energy a lot more, there's a big issue of them not helping or assisting the developing countries of the world in the global south. And secondly, I've also seen that in countries like the US, there's a lot of denial towards climate change. And if we see that, one of the two major political parties in the country, which is the Republican Party in the US, tries to deny climate change or has a very low amount of trust towards climate scientists, that's incredibly dangerous. And the more of like this influence sort of grows in the developed world, the more difficult it would be to get funding for the developing countries instead also. So I think this is one of the few concerns that I have with the developed countries.
Yes, I points here because I personally, yes, Harshita.
Yeah, and just a brief note, but again, if we look at the outcome of COP28, the communique which was developed, it was actually a non-binding one, which was something that developed countries were greatly in support of. And while I do understand the perspective of developing countries in terms of meeting their development needs and why they need a non-binding legislation, it makes no sense for developed countries to adhere to such a policy, especially given that they do have the capacity to transform to a more environmentally sustainable level of development. And it just points towards a pattern of shifting the broader burden of environmental action towards developing countries. And so, yeah, they have historically followed that pattern, and I feel that they continue doing so.
Yes, moving the goalposts from one end to the other. Let's moving on. You mentioned about the COP28. So, what do you feel that has COP28 been able to achieve anything?
I mean, they have made some strides when it comes to fossil fuels, but I think we can't generally be blamed for being a little pessimistic about the way COP28 will affect the climate change battle in the future, because I feel that on the global stage, countries have not yet, gotten out of the stage of having geopolitics involved or looking out for self-interest above, the interest of the planet. So for now, it's it's kind of difficult to tell if COP28 has achieved anything, while on paper it has achieved quite a lot. To see these implementation or these changes in real life will take some time, and I think that is something that at least I am a little pessimistic about.
I can agree with you on that because there's also the news that United Arab Emirates was partnering with COP28, also looking for new petroleum deals on the side of that summit as well. Uh, Moving on, do you feel that COP28 only has been an eye washer just to give your look domestic audience something to feel placated about that we are doing something about it, or it's just actually they're working on something, or it's just an eye wash?
I think with these sort of summits, especially, you can't actually trace their impact and you can't quantify their impact in, simple economical terms. What you can do is you can understand the long-lasting impacts because essentially all these summits provide a forum for discussion, right? And this discussion is something that usually when we're in a country, we do not know what kind of discussions are taking place inside the legislature, or what kind of discussions are being taken by bureaucrats taking important executive policy decisions. So we are pretty much unaware of that. But it is essentially because of these summits that we as stakeholders of this planet actually get to witness what discussions are being done, and it actually helps to you know build our awareness and our understanding and our education on this particular subject. Furthermore, I think summits like these also help increase the momentum with which people address or talk about climate change. And this momentum is something that also puts pressure on governments to do some sort of action or to take some sort of pledge. And it also helps corporations to take some meaningful action so that they can attract this global momentum towards themselves.
Yes, please, Harshita.
Yeah, there were actually a lot of unofficial agreements made in terms of cutting back on methane, and there were also a couple of public-private sector partnerships announced when it comes to accelerating the drive towards green electricity and ensuring food security. However, when it comes to major commitments, like Tanush mentioned about fossil fuels, we see on paper that they've mentioned that they will begin phasing down on fossil fuels from 2050. So these goals, which keep getting a target deadline of many, many years down the line, what I think such platforms, again, there are speeches about how this is sort of the beginning of the end and all of that. But I don't think they are translating into concrete policies because target deadlines are again being set many years into the future, which we are not really sure if we will survive at this point till that stage. So, yeah, it's failing to translate into meaningful policies which can actually be implemented currently. And it feels like a major sort of procrastination among countries.
Interesting point here. Almost like our assignments. We procrastinate on that too. Yes, Tanish.
I just wanted to add that historically, COP summits have had a lot of agreements that countries have said that they have met. Like, India has met its needs like quite a lot. And I think while that is some of the more positive news that we see, the targets that countries set in the first place are not very consequential as well. So we see countries failing their targets, and the targets that were set, even if they weren't failing it, were not enough anyway. So I think when it comes to historically COP summits, a lot of small changes have taken place, but when it comes to major advancements, I think we're lacking by a lot because even when we say that India has met its goals or this country has met their goals a lot, we don't really see any concrete changes or any major changes. It's half the time it's just smaller little like goals that are not really going to have any major sort of consequences anyway, and that too countries fail to sort of meet. So COP summits, I think historically, are sort of on the fence between actually having some effect and just being eye washers, in my opinion.
Yes, moving on. What do you feel is India's role in the larger struggle against carbon, and how can India do more to prevent this overflow of carbon?
I think being a population of almost 2 billion and counting, India is definitely one of the most largest roles to play, especially when we talk about our carbon footprint. And I think much of it is already being taken care of. A lot of promises have been made by this year's COP20 summit by Mr. Modi, Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Modi. And there have also been a lot of energy transitions towards, hydro generation of power in Gujarat, sectors of Gujarat and Rajasthan. There's also been transition towards e-vehicles and, public transportation being updated. And there's also a lot of metro network being laid down so that people would be, encouraged to use the public transport instead of taking their own cars. So I think small steps are being taken, but they are definitely being taken in the right direction.
Yes, please, Tanish.
Yeah, just again, like the point I've added throughout this meeting, the global south is really where India has a big role to play because while we might be in sort of in a contesting sort of place with China at the moment in regards to whether or not we're the leader of the global south, I think historically India, when it comes to climate change at least and international organizations or summits, has played a better role of representing the global south. And I think that when it comes to like major like population centers of the world, they do lie in the global south only. So I think for India, the major role right now is not only to cut back on its own emissions, but also to ensure that the needs of the global south are met when it comes to economic assistance or having the global north, which is a developed like place already. They don't have to go through developmental phases right now. So they can at least afford a lot of capital and they can afford to cut back on their emissions. I think that's India's big role right now to represent the global south and the needs of poorer developing countries.
Yeah, very, very valid points here. Please, Harshita.
I personally feel that India has made formidable progress in the field of taking more bold climate initiatives. India, I think it's expected to become the world's third largest ethanol market worldwide. And renewable electricity is also growing in India at a much faster capacity than it is in any other major economy in the world. The only issue is, so given that the global economy is going through a recessive pattern currently. The only issue is for India to continue on this track of climate progress and not buckling under the pressure of development. Of economic needs and to sort of cutting back on its climate initiatives. Moreover, there's a need for all of these initiatives to reach towards the grassroots levels as well, because that is where actual change can, transform India's capacity to aid other countries as well. So yeah.
Valid points here, Ashika. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that COP28, though an important step in our struggle against carbon, would require much more than merely a summit. It would require major effort from all sides of the global struggle and for a joint planet. Because what worth is a Cold War for a planet which no longer exists, which no longer feeds your own people, and which no longer provides anything for you, for future generations? That's all from our side. Thank you, and we hope to see you on the next one.